All right, everyone. So let's continue this week on McLuhan, and in this lecture, I'll try to connect McLuhan to Joshua Merowitz, which is one of the two readings you have to do for today. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about McLuhan by telling you that McLuhan was highly inspired by Walter J. Ong, who wrote this book in 1982, Orality and Literacy. Ong says that in oral cultures, right, in pre-modern cultures, in tribal culture, expression is aggregative, redundant, and copious rather than analytical and synthetic. There is a tendency in oral culture to use expressions such as and instead of using causal relationships or synthetic expressions. There is a preference for concrete examples over abstractions and the use of proverbs that allow people to remember things more easily, sometimes speaking in rhymes, which allows them to hand over the culture to the next generation, since this cannot be transcribed and stored in recording media more easily, right? So, by contrast, in literacy, writing, the introduction of writing enables backward scanning, which means that text can be revised, that is, language can be corrected and homogenized. The empirical observations of patterns also that emerge from writing can be standardized through rules allowing for the emergence of grammar and logical analysis, right? All these things that we study in school are possible only after the invention of writing. Oral cultures do not have books of grammar and do not teach the language from one generation to the other through formal rules. Now, this allows for Ong for the development of analytical thought, which leads to higher abstractions, and it makes possible in turn the emergence of modern science. The printing press in particular, right, which makes text more available and allows for the private ownership of text, also reinforces individuality and a sense of privacy. Now, the Phoenician alphabet, which constitutes the basis for the Greek alphabet, was still based, says Ong and other historians of media, on the pictographic glyph. And the pictographic glyph had a reference, still a reference to reality, right? The Aleph, the A of the modern alphabet, was the portrayal of an ox. A bet was a representation of a house. Mem, the modern M, is the waves of the sea. The Q is a monkey seen from behind. The O is a stylization of the I, to make a few examples. So the Greeks inherited the Phoenician alphabet and introduced two important innovations. First, they added vowels so as to make it readable. The Phoenician alphabet was still unvocalized, it could not be pronounced aloud. And second, they simplified and standardized the letters of the Phoenician alphabet so as to make the writing faster and easier. This means that if the pictographic glyph still referred to an external and animated world, of which it was the image, with the Greeks a direct association is established between the pictorial sign and its vocalization, for the first time completely bypassing the reality that is pictured by the glyph. Thus, in this way, a self-referential system is set in motion whose dynamics are exclusively determined by the interplay of grammatical and phonetic rules that govern a language. And here we might think about how Saussure talks about language as a structure. So this has led an historian of communication and media, such as Eric Havelock, to claim that the invention of the Greek alphabet, as opposed to all previous systems, including the Phoenician, constituted an event in the history of human culture, the importance of which has not yet been fully grasped. Its appearance divides all pre-Greek civilization from those that are post-Greek. Now, McLuhan is interested in the impact that media have on the sensorium, right? The sensorium is nothing but the balance of the five senses. And in the tribal world, in the oral culture world, for McLuhan, these senses were perfectly balanced, meaning none of the senses was more important than the others. Whereas with the emergence of literacy, the sense of the eye becomes dominant. He also is also interested in media because media obviously affect our culture and therefore our sense of self in relation to others. His expression, the global village, right, which makes perfect sense, for example, when we apply to the internet or real-time communication over cell phones, for example, is really captures this dynamic between the local and the global, the self and the other. This is a quote from the Playboy interview on the phonetic alphabet. I'm not going to read it to you because it just says what I just said. In particular, I want to emphasize that the introduction of the phonetic alphabet diminished the role of the sense of hearing and touch and taste and smell. So I want to underscore that for McLuhan, what matters is really the impact that technologies have on the senses. So there are three major effects for McLuhan of the printing press, which of course sped up the circulation of text and allowed for the emergence of national languages and nationalism in particular, as I said before, for the private ownership of books and therefore for private reading and the emergence of a modern sense of individualism. Think about Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am as a first manifestation of modern consciousness. And then typography also, because it's kind of standardized and infinitely reproducible in kind of linear patterns. Think about, again, movable type, allows for the emergence of the assembly line and therefore of the Industrial Revolution. So these are the sweeping claims that McLuhan makes about the effects that the printing press had on modern culture, nationalism, individualism, and the Industrial Revolution. The introduction, however, of electronic media with the invention of the telegraph in the 19th century brings about, as we have seen, a new arrangement, right? A new balance of the senses, which leads McLuhan to claim that TV ends the visual supremacy of the press, which is kind of a paradoxical claim, and that TV is an extension of the sense of touch. And he's thinking about here about analog television. You have to think about the black and white television of the 1960s, which he considers a lo-fi medium with its kind of scan lines, right, that the eye needs to decode and interpret. Therefore, this is for him a cool medium that demands and calls for intense participation and brings about a new kind of human being who craves in-depth involvement. I will gloss over Walter J. Young's definition of secondary reality, just to notice that for Young, electronic culture is a mix of the oral culture of belonging to tribal men, but it's still based on the use of the alphabet and print, and therefore is a hybrid of the two. So the concept of retribalization, when McLuhan wrote about it, was obviously thinking about the hippies and the rise of counterculture, right? This is an image from a photo from Woodstock in 1968. But you know, that retribalization is over is questionable because we now know that, for example, each year thousands and thousands of people meet in the middle of the Nevada desert for the Burning Man, which is fairly much a tribal or neo-tribal event. There's been various criticisms of course of McLuhan. Is considered by many a hard techno-determinist who sees technologies as disjuncted from social and economic needs. He considers their impact as uniform on different cultures. Further, many of his claims are difficult to demonstrate, in particular how and why media affect the senses is unclear, and he has not left a method for other scholars to follow in his footsteps. These are further criticisms that have been leveraged, like McLuhan, that have been leveraged in particular by Raymond Williams. But I want to close the lecture by referring to the work of Erving Goffman, who has nothing to do with McLuhan. He's a sociologist, and Goffman writes in the late 50s this very important book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, in which he claims that life is a performance and that we constantly interact with others and adjust our behaviors accordingly. Right now, for example, I'm performing my role as a teacher before a camera. This means that every time we approach like a social interaction, we define the situation in which we are in and perform accordingly, and our ability to understand the situation gives the performance coherence. A third important concept is that in performances there is always a front stage and a backstage. Right now I'm performing on my front stage, but for example, when I was preparing this lecture, I was in my backstage. So Joshua Merowitz brings together, in the book that you're reading for today, brings together Goffman's social interactionism with McLuhan's broader claims about the power of media. But instead of saying that media reshape the sensorium, which is something that for Merowitz is difficult to assess, he claims that media change the relationship between the backstage and the front stage, the private and the public, and that the private and the public, the backstage and the front stage, are determined by humans in informational terms rather than spatial terms. Right now, I'm performing knowing that you will be listening to me, right? So I'm thinking in informational terms. Electronic media, however, multiply what Merowitz calls middle regions, that is spaces that are neither front stage nor backstage. But we do not have maps to navigate these middle regions, as we communicate differently with different people and under different circumstances. So for example, like this is a kiss cam, right, in a stadium. So why do people laugh when they are on kiss cam? Well, because you are supposed to perform an act, kissing your partner, that is considered to be intimate, and that we often perform in what Goffman might call backstages, but this time the cam asks you to perform it in public. Or in this case, there is a girl talking on the phone, on the cell phone, in a theater, right? She's obviously having a lot of fun, but she doesn't realize that she's in a space where her behavior is certainly not understood as polite. So Merowitz really talks about this confusion that electronic media introduce. And I would like you to think about the movie that you have to watch for today, We Live in Public, by using Joshua Merowitz's approach or lens or way of looking at it. And watch that movie. It's an amazing movie. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.